I pulled into the driveway of my in-laws' house just as the sun began to set, the air thick with the smell of grilled burgers and ribs. The soft clinking of glasses carried across the yard, mingling with the easy laughter of people who seemed perfectly at home in each other's company. I adjusted my dress in the rearview mirror, took a breath, and reminded myself that family barbecues were supposed to be about warmth and connection. In America, a backyard barbecue is the great equalizer. Neighbors, friends, family, all gathered around paper plates and laughter. But as I stepped out of the car, I felt the faint tug of anxiety in my stomach. Sophrona was the first to notice me. She floated across the patio with a drink in her manicured hand, her smile as sharp as glass. "Oh," she said, her eyes flicking up and down. "You look different from what we imagined. More ordinary." She tilted her head, the words dressed like a compliment but aimed like a dart. I smiled politely, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. "Ordinary works for me," I replied, my voice even. Inside, though, her words lodged like a thorn. I had heard enough of them over the years to know this wasn't an accident. It was her way of marking territory. I joined the crowd on the patio. Everyone else was in clusters, Sophrona with her admirers, Honora pouring iced tea as if her approval were sacred, cousins laughing about vacations in Florida. I hovered at the edges, nodding, offering polite smiles, but not really pulled into the current. The undertone was clear. Family was supposed to be where you felt most at home, unless the welcome mat was only for some. The evening rolled on, plates piled with barbecue ribs, potato salad, and corn on the cob. I carried mine to a table, deliberately choosing a seat in the corner. I didn't need to be at the center of attention, but I didn't want to be invisible either. The distinction, however, seemed to matter only to me. Sophrona held court effortlessly. Her boutique in the city was apparently the highlight of every conversation. She spoke about her latest shipment of Italian fabrics, and everyone leaned in like students around a beloved professor. I chewed quietly, listening to people admire her, noticing how their questions circled her, not me. My work, managing the finances of a medical supply company, was practical, unglamorous, and, it seemed, unworthy of mention. Do they see me as part of this family? I wondered silently, or just a placeholder at the edge of their photograph? As the evening softened, someone suggested a family picture. Chairs scraped, children wriggled, aunts and uncles lined up under the glow of patio lights. I found myself standing at the far end, just inside the frame. A photographer, one of the younger cousins with an iPhone, counted down. I smiled dutifully, but my smile felt heavy, like holding my breath too long. Later that night, after I got home, I sat with a cup of tea and opened my phone. There it was, already posted to Sophrona's feed. Everyone gathered neatly, faces lit with the glow of shared belonging. Everyone except me. My body had been neatly cropped out, the frame tightened so that I might as well have never stood there at all. I stared at it, heat rising in my face. My jaw tightened, my stomach knotted, and my hand hovered over the screen as though touching the photo might change it. Was it deliberate? I knew the answer before the question finished forming. Sophrona had curated the image exactly as she curated her boutique displays. If you're in the frame, you're family. If you're cropped, you never mattered. That thought echoed through me like a bell. The next morning, I replayed her words, ordinary, cropped, invisible, as though they were on a loop. At the kitchen table, the light pouring through the blinds, I held my mug a little too tightly. Do I confront it, or do I let it go? I asked myself. How many times can I let it go before I disappear completely? I thought about what Eleanor Roosevelt had said. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. I repeated it quietly, a mantra. But I also knew that every silent consent I had given before had become bricks in the wall they built to keep me out. I wasn't impulsive. I wasn't reckless. At 34, I had learned the value of holding back, of choosing battles carefully. But as I stared at the cropped photo again, I felt something shift. Hurt gave way to a quiet seed of resistance. I set my phone down and breathed deeply. I didn't realize then that being cropped out of a picture was just the beginning of how they would try to erase me. By the time the sun had dipped below the horizon, the long table in the dining room was crowded with relatives balancing plates and glasses. The clatter of cutlery and the hum of conversation filled the space, punctuated by bursts of laughter that didn't include me. Sophrona sat 2 chairs down, in her usual spotlight, answering question after question about her boutique downtown. "She's the pride of the family," Honora declared, smiling at Sophrona as though she'd produced gold from thin air. The others nodded in agreement, raising their glasses like they were toasting a queen. "What's the secret to keeping your business thriving in such a competitive market?" one cousin asked. Sophrona leaned forward, her voice pitched for admiration. "It's all about vision. You have to create a brand people recognize, something they aspire to be part of." There was an approving murmur around the table. I stabbed my fork into a piece of potato casserole and chewed silently. Not once did anyone turn to me and ask about my work. I managed budgets for a regional medical supply chain, a position that had kept my household afloat more times than I cared to count. Yet, no one clapped for spreadsheets. No one toasted financial discipline. In America, we clap for success, I thought to myself, but sometimes it's only for the glitter, not the grind. I folded my napkin slowly, my eyes drifting to the faces glowing with admiration for Sophrona's polished answers. Their pride wasn't in the strength that pays bills, but in the sparkle that photographs well, and in that contrast, the imbalance cut sharper than any words. After dessert plates had been cleared, people moved toward the kitchen for coffee. I followed, trying to blend into the crowd, when Sophrona's voice rose above the clatter. "Oh, what's this?" she said, plucking a folded envelope from the counter. She turned it over, smiling sweetly. "A bank statement? Whose could this be?" My heart sank. I had set it aside earlier while helping clear dishes, intending to tuck it back into my purse before leaving. But in Sophrona's hands, it was no longer just paper. It was a weapon. She unfolded it, eyes skimming with feigned innocence before she read aloud. Not much in savings, investments. Oh dear, none at all. I guess not everyone here knows how to save or invest wisely." A hush fell, broken by a few awkward chuckles. Someone coughed. Another looked down into their coffee cup. I felt my face flush, heat rising like a wave, but I kept my chin level. I forced my voice calm. "That's private." "Oh, of course," Sophrona said, tilting her head. "I only meant it as advice. We all want each other to thrive, don't we?" Her smile was sugary, but her eyes glittered with triumph. Honora gave a small laugh. "Sophrona's right. It's important to plan for the future. Not everyone has the same instincts with money." I didn't reply. My grip tightened around the mug I held, my knuckles pale against the porcelain. Inside, my thoughts spiraled, but outwardly, I gave her nothing. Privacy is power, I told myself. What they don't know, they can't twist. But she had twisted enough. What stung wasn't the exposure, it was the pretense of care, humiliation disguised as wisdom. And the others let it slide, chuckling as though nothing cruel had just been said. I wanted to snap back, to remind them that while Sophrona played shopkeeper, I paid bills that kept real lives running, but I swallowed the words. Silence, I knew, could be sharper than an outburst. As conversation resumed, my mind replayed the cropped photo from the barbecue, now paired with this bank statement. A pattern emerged, deliberate and calculated. Chip away at me in public until everyone accepted the picture she painted, that I was less. I wasn't weak for staying quiet, I reminded myself as I sat back at the table. I was storing every cut, every sting, waiting for the right time to bleed truth. The evening wound down, relatives dispersing into smaller groups, laughter thinning as the night cooled. I slipped out onto the porch, the cicadas humming in the dark, the suburban street quiet except for the occasional bark of a dog. I leaned against the railing, letting the night air cool the heat in my cheeks. Should I confront her now, call her cruelty what it was? Or should I wait, bide my time? I thought of women I admired, those who had survived worse, those who had taught me that dignity wasn't about never being wounded, but about choosing when to strike back. I remembered a quote Eleanor Roosevelt once gave. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Tonight, I refuse to give mine. I straightened, slipped my purse over my shoulder, and stepped off the porch into the quiet street. The night carried the weight of everything unspoken. But inside me, something steadier had taken root, but if silence was my shield tonight, I knew the next time, I'd need a sword. Sunday morning carried a false calm. The kitchen smelled of brewed coffee and bacon, plates clinking gently as relatives shuffled in one by one. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, painting the table with neat squares of brightness. On the surface, everything looked serene, but I felt the tension from the night before lingering like smoke after a fire. Everyone acted overly cheerful, too many smiles, too many exaggerated laughs, as if they could scrub away what had been said. Sophrona, of course, positioned herself at the center. She poured orange juice with a dramatic flourish, offering toast and jam as though she owned the morning itself. I found my seat at the far end, a chair that seemed always reserved for me, close enough to be present, far enough to be sidelined. When plates of pancakes were passed, mine came last, barely warm. I noticed, but I didn't comment. Sometimes silence at the table is louder than any toast, and that morning, the silence around me said everything. I reached for my cup, fingers curling around its warmth, when Sophrona leaned forward, her voice sweet but sharpened. You know, an outsider will never be blood. Her smile didn't falter. She even laughed softly, like it was a harmless joke. The words sliced through the air nonetheless, cutting sharper than the butter knife in her hand. There was a beat of stunned quiet, followed by awkward chuckles from two uncles. Someone shifted in their chair. One cousin coughed and focused intently on his eggs. No one met my eyes. I felt the sting crawl from my chest up my neck. My pulse hammered. My hands trembled under the table, but I steadied my breathing, refusing to let her see. Inside, though, I burned. I thought about a saying I once heard. In-laws can make you feel like you married the family, not the person. This was exactly that. They wanted me as decoration, a bystander to their stories, but never part of the roots they bragged about. I set my fork down quietly, staring at the coffee rippling in my cup. For a moment, I considered walking away, but then I looked up and met Sophrona's eyes. Blood doesn't make family, I said evenly. Loyalty does. The room froze. My words weren't loud, but they carried. Sophrona's smile wavered, only for a second, before she smirked and shrugged as if to dismiss me. No one spoke. The silence weighed heavier than her insult. I glanced around. Relatives shifted, sipped coffee, adjusted napkins. Not one person came to my defense. That silence carved a deeper wound than her words ever could. Inside my head, I heard Martin Luther King Jr.'s words. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. I held my composure, though my thoughts screamed. Their stillness told me everything about where I stood. I wasn't merely sidelined, I was unworthy of acknowledgement. The meal continued stiffly, chatter resuming with a forced rhythm. Sophrona chatted with Honora about fabrics for her boutique. My husband stirred his coffee without a word, eyes fixed on the table. Every moment etched itself into me, each one a confirmation that this wasn't oversight, it was a choice. When breakfast finally wound down, I excused myself quietly and stepped outside. The porch creaked under my weight as I leaned against the railing, breathing in the heavy summer air. The cicadas were already buzzing, the streets silent except for the occasional car. I replayed it all, the cropped photo, the bank statement humiliation, and now this. Sophrona's direct strike, unchallenged by anyone. It wasn't just discomfort anymore. This was war by 1,000 cuts. I whispered to myself, steady and sure. If they thought I would keep swallowing their poison, they hadn't seen me sharpen my antidote yet. I woke before the sun, the quiet of the house still wrapped in shadows. In the kitchen, I tied an apron around my waist and began chopping vegetables, lining trays with foil, and marinating meat that would later sizzle on the grill. The smell of onions clung to my hands, and steam from the boiling pot blurred my glasses. Hours passed without acknowledgement. No one came to check on me, no one offered help. My only company was the steady hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of my own utensils. When I peeked outside, I noticed Sophrona's car missing from the driveway. Later, I overheard she had gone for a spa appointment, preparing herself while I sweated over the stove. The realization settled like a stone in my chest. She would arrive radiant, manicured, and praised for her efforts while my back ached and my hands burned. Americans often say, the kitchen is the heart of the home. But here, it wasn't warmth. It was confinement. My labor was invisible, expected, unworthy of thanks. Hard work should earn respect, not invisibility. Instead, I had become the ghost of the household, serving quietly but never recognized. I carried platters into the dining room when Honora walked in. She paused, scanning the counters crowded with food. "Well," she said with a faint smirk, "you really do belong in here." Her tone made it clear. It wasn't praise. It was dismissal, disguised as a compliment. I forced myself to keep moving, setting down the tray of rolls, though my pulse quickened. In their eyes, I thought, I was never a guest, never family, just hired help with no paycheck. She poured herself coffee and moved past me as if I were a piece of furniture. I stared at her back, biting down the retort clawing its way up my throat. Respect, I reminded myself, is earned in cups of coffee and thank yous, not in being taken for granted. But there were no thank yous here. I carried another dish to the table, brushing shoulders with cousins who walked by without acknowledgement. Their conversations flowed around me as if I didn't exist, laughter punctuating stories I wasn't invited to join. Then Amaranta arrived, one of the distant relatives who prided herself on being fashionably early. She stepped into the kitchen, handed me her jacket without hesitation, and said, "Can you hang this up for me?" I froze. Her assumption was casual, thoughtless, but it landed heavy. I swallowed hard, accepting the coat in silence, watching as she drifted away to greet Sophrona's children with hugs and compliments. No one corrected her. Not Honora, who was still sipping coffee. Not Sophrona, who had just returned and caught the whole exchange. In fact, Sophrona smirked, enjoying my humiliation as if it were entertainment. Sometimes, I thought bitterly, the deepest cuts come not from enemies, but from those who let the lie stand. I held Amaranta's jacket for a moment, my fingers digging into the fabric before finally hanging it on the rack. The sting in my chest deepened, and I realized patience was fraying. Every joke, every slight, every silence, they were stacking higher and higher, and I was running out of room to carry them. When the kitchen cleared, I finally turned to Sophrona. My voice was low but firm. "Keep pushing me," I said, locking eyes with her. "And you'll see I'm not as silent as you think." Her brows lifted in mock amusement. She let out a soft laugh. "Oh, Ayala, don't be so dramatic. It's just family banter. Don't take everything so seriously." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Her dismissal was expected, but inside me something shifted. I knew I had to start preparing, not food, not coffee, not another thankless chore, but weapons of a different kind. Not blades or fists, but the kind of truth that couldn't be laughed away. Sometimes the strongest warnings aren't shouted, they're whispered just before the storm. They thought the kitchen was where I belonged, but it would be the place I began planning my escape. The afternoon sun hung heavy over the driveway as car after car pulled up. Doors slammed, children tumbled out, voices carried in cheerful greetings. Inside the foyer, laughter rose as relatives embraced and complimented one another on their outfits, their tans, their lives. I balanced a tray of glasses, moving carefully through the crowd, trying not to spill while they all floated effortlessly from one conversation to the next. Sophrona glided down the hallway like a hostess at a gala. She wore a flowing dress, hair styled just so, and every eye turned to her. She didn't carry trays or refill pitchers. She gestured, pointed, delegated. And still, she earned the admiration that should come from work, not performance. I caught my reflection in the mirror above the side table, my dress slightly wrinkled from hours of prep, my hands red from handling hot pans. The contrast was unmistakable. In moments like this, blurred between guest and servant, I felt the sting most. When you're always placed behind the curtain, I thought as I forced a smile at a cousin brushing past me, you start to wonder if they ever meant for you to stand in the spotlight. I set the tray down on the buffet table just as a tall uncle's friend, a man I barely knew, approached. Without hesitation, he handed me his glass. "Could you top this off for me?" he asked, already scanning the room for someone else to talk to. My chest tightened. Sophrona stood nearby, watching, her lips curving into that smirk I had come to know so well. She didn't correct him. She enjoyed this. I steadied my breath and remembered something I once read. Respect yourself enough to demand it. Otherwise, no one else will. I met his eyes and said firmly, "I'm not staff. I'm family." The man blinked, his face flushing. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize." I handed the glass back to him, my tone calm but unyielding. "Now you do." Behind him, Sophrona let out a light laugh. "Easy mistake," she said, brushing it aside as though I were being sensitive. But the damage had been done. The humiliation, the smirk, the silence, it all fueled a rising anger that refused to be swallowed this time. I walked away from the buffet table and deliberately took a seat at the long dining table, one of the main chairs, not the corner where I usually drifted. I folded my hands, lifted my chin, and waited. It didn't take long. Sophrona swept over, leaning down so only I could hear. "If you're not going to help, at least don't get in the way," she hissed. I turned my head slowly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Helping isn't the same as being used. Maybe you should learn the difference." Gasps rippled from nearby relatives who had caught my words. Eyes darted between us, forks stilled mid-air. Sophrona's smile faltered, the first real crack I had seen in her mask. She straightened, her voice louder this time. "Don't twist this, Ayala. Everyone here contributes in their own way. Some of us just know where we're most useful." "Useful," I repeated, my voice even, "isn't the same as respected, and I think you know that." The silence that followed was louder than the chatter had been a moment ago. My heart raced, adrenaline surging. But beneath the fear was something new. Empowerment. I had said the words out loud, and they couldn't be unsaid. I thought of Eleanor Roosevelt's words, "Do what you feel in your heart to be right, for you'll be criticized anyway." I let the quote anchor me as I sat tall, refusing to back down. Later, after the table was crowded again and the tension eased into forced conversation, I slipped into the kitchen for a cup of coffee. I held it between my palms, my heart still pounding. This wasn't the explosion, it was only the spark. But sparks, left unattended, could burn a house down. And if they weren't careful, that was exactly what I would do. For the first time, I stopped swallowing my silence, and they noticed. The dining room glowed with the warmth of a summer afternoon. Light spilled through tall windows, catching crystal glasses and polished silverware until everything sparkled. The long table stretched across the room, set for nearly 20, with laughter filling the air before the first plate had even been passed. Children darted between chairs, cousins leaned over to whisper secrets, and the rhythm of family chatter built like a familiar song. I sat near the end, my chair in the shadows where the sunlight didn't quite reach. The table was alive with voices, yet a line seemed drawn across it. On one side, Sophrona presided, her voice smooth, carrying without effort. She commanded the space as though she had been born to it. On the other side, I listened, offered polite smiles, and poured water for the children near me. A seat at the table doesn't mean you belong at it. I knew that now. Sophrona rose gracefully, tapping her glass. "Everyone, may I have your attention?" The room fell silent, and I felt the anticipation crawl up my spine. She gestured for a tray of champagne flutes, and one of the teenagers eagerly carried it down the line. She lifted the first glass, handing it to Honora with a smile. "To the matriarch who has always been our guide." The relatives clapped. Another glass went to an uncle, another to a cousin. She worked her way down, one glass after another, her voice brimming with affection for each recipient. When the tray reached me, she glanced past as if I weren't there. My spot remained bare. She didn't stumble, didn't hesitate. It was deliberate, practiced. Finally, Sophrona raised her own glass. "This toast is for family," she said, her eyes sweeping the room with pride. The crystal chimed as everyone else lifted theirs. I sat frozen, hands folded, the emptiness in front of me louder than the cheer. A hush lingered just long enough for me to notice the nervous glances, the averted eyes. Someone cleared their throat, and the moment passed as though nothing had happened. Inside, my chest burned. My pulse quickened, but I clenched my jaw, refusing to let my face betray me. In this country, a toast isn't just a drink, it's recognition. Being skipped is being erased. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to lift my water glass and sip as if nothing were wrong. My dignity hung by a thread, but I wouldn't give Sophrona the satisfaction of seeing it snap. After the toast, dishes began to arrive. Platters of roasted chicken, bowls of green beans, baskets of rolls passed hand to hand. The room hummed again, conversation swelling as plates filled. For a moment, I thought the worst of it had passed. Then Sophrona stood again, her heels clicking softly on the wood floor as she moved toward the kitchen. "I have a special surprise," she announced, voice honeyed. She disappeared for a moment before returning with a silver tray. On it were delicate plates, each crowned with a glossy tart. Berries glistened under the light, whipped cream perched like clouds, Gasps of delight circled the table. She set one in front of Honora, another before an uncle, another down the line. When she reached my place, she breezed past, her steps smooth, her tray still heavy. My spot remained bare. "Oops," she said with a laugh that wasn't laughter at all. "I thought you were dieting." The words floated in the air before sinking deep. A few people chuckled softly, others shifted in their seats. Someone quickly asked about the recipe, their voice too loud, trying to steer the moment away. I stared at my empty space, hands trembling beneath the tablecloth. The humiliation stripped me bare in front of everyone, as though I had been undressed in public. They may forget what you said, I thought, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And I would never forget this. I lifted my eyes, searching the table. Not one person spoke. No one slid their plate toward me, in quiet defiance. No one dared say, "She deserves one too." Their silence, again, was the loudest sound in the room. I sat rigid, my spine straight, my gaze fixed. I would not give them tears. I would not give them the collapse they wanted. But inside, fury swelled so hot I thought my skin might split. This was no accident. It was calculated cruelty, staged humiliation, and I was the chosen spectacle. They thought it was harmless, a joke that would dissolve with dessert. They had no idea what it would cost them. As I pushed back my chair at the end of the meal, I carried only my composure, but my thoughts sharpened like steel. The time for warnings was over. My silence had been their shield. It would no longer protect them. It wasn't the champagne that burned my throat that day. It was the silence I refused to swallow any longer. The room after Sophrona's last jab felt like it had collapsed in on itself. Her mocking words about my so-called diet still echoed, and though conversation had returned in stilted bursts, I could hear every scrape of fork against porcelain like it was magnified. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out the polite chatter around me. I kept my gaze on my plate, but I could sense Sophrona's eyes darting toward me, her smirk curling like smoke. She savored the scene. I reached for my glass of water, fingers trembling just enough that I steadied it with my other hand. The bubbles in the room's chatter floated too high-pitched, forced, as though everyone was pretending not to notice the gap in front of me where a dessert plate should have been. The humiliation sat heavy on my chest, suffocating, waiting for a crack to force its way through. Then came the voice that broke the hush. "Why doesn't Aunt Ayala get champagne and dessert like everyone else?" It was my nephew, barely 8, his innocent eyes wide as he looked from me to the empty spot before me. His words hung in the air like a bell that couldn't be unrung. A murmur of shock rolled through the table. His mother quickly leaned down, whispering frantically, "Shh, sweetie, eat your cake." But the damage was done. The truth had been spoken out loud, naked and unpolished. Sophrona chuckled lightly, trying to smooth it over. "Oh, darling, Aunt Ayala's just fine without it. She's watching her figure." The room chuckled awkwardly, some relatives looking at the child, others at their plates. No one looked at me, but the sting from that child's words wasn't pain, it was validation. Children don't know how to lie politely yet. Their honesty feels like a blade, and in that blade, I saw my own reflection, the outsider at a table that never wanted me seated. I felt heat crawling up my throat. I turned my eyes toward my husband, seated across, sipping his drink as if nothing had been said. My voice came out steady, louder than I meant, slicing the room open. "Tell me," I asked, each word deliberate. "Am I family or not?" The air froze. Every movement halted. A fork halfway to a mouth paused, a glass set back down with care. Sophrona's smirk faltered, replaced by stillness. My husband's eyes darted around, avoiding mine. "Don't do this," he muttered finally, his voice low. "Not here." "Not here?" I repeated, my tone calm but rising. "When else? After 7 years of being invisible, this is exactly the place." The silence pressed against me, but I leaned into it. I raised my chin, though my hands trembled under the tablecloth. My voice carried across the table, a sharp break in the forced cheer. "There's a saying," I continued, "if you don't stand up at the table, you'll be on the menu. Tonight, I'm done being served up as silence." Gasps rippled. A cousin coughed. Honora shifted, shaking her head. "This is beneath us," she murmured, dismissing me like a child throwing a tantrum. Sophrona laughed, the sound brittle. "Drama at dinner. It wouldn't be a family lunch without it. But her joke didn't land. Relatives shifted uncomfortably, eyes cast downward. None spoke, none defended, none even whispered support. Their silence was louder than applause could have been. Inside, I felt the sting sharper than any insult Sophrona had thrown. It wasn't just her words anymore, it was their refusal. Their silence said clearly, "You are not, and never will be, one of us." I sat back, my pulse still hammering, my jaw clenched. Pain hardened, cooling into resolve. They thought they could erase me with omissions, with silence, with toasts that skipped my place. They were wrong. If my own question couldn't make them see me, then maybe the truth I carried would. The dining room was frozen in the wake of my question. My voice still lingered in the air. Am I family or not? For a heartbeat, no one moved. The only sound was the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. Sophrona leaned back in her chair, lips curved into that smug smile she wore like armor. She gave a small laugh, brittle and forced, as though she could brush off the fracture splitting the room. Across from me, my husband muttered again, "Don't do this now." His eyes glued to his plate. He sounded weary, like the problem was my timing, not the years of cuts that had led us here. I felt my palms sweat against the tablecloth, my heartbeat drumming in my ears. Yet I didn't back down. I remembered words I once read from Martin Luther King Jr. There comes a time when silence is betrayal. That moment had arrived. I straightened my back and let the silence stretch, suffocating every soul in the room, until I finally spoke again. "You want to pretend I'm not part of this family? Fine. But while you celebrated and looked down on me, I carried your burdens in silence." The ripple began immediately. Heads snapped toward me. Whispers stirred. Sophrona's smirk wavered for the first time. "You're being dramatic," she said quickly. "No one asked you to." I cut her off. "Mortgage payments, utility bills, tuition for your daughter's private school. Sophrona, who do you think has been covering those? For over a year, I've been paying the debts this family pretends don't exist." The room gasped. Forks clattered against plates. My husband's face drained of color. A cousin muttered, "What is she talking about?" "They wanted me invisible," I said, my voice steady now. "But I was the one making sure the lights stayed on, the roof stayed over your heads. I carried it all in silence, and now you'll choke on that truth." Disbelief flickered across their faces. Honora tried to shake her head, dismissing me. "This is family business. This is family betrayal," I snapped, locking eyes with her. "And everyone deserves to hear it." The murmurs grew louder, overlapping questions bouncing around the table. My husband stammered, "You don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do," I replied, reaching into my bag. My fingers closed around my phone, and I tapped the screen alive. The glow cut through the heavy room. "And I have proof." I pulled up my banking app, scrolling through the long line of transfers, the receipts that bore my name. "Mortgage here." I tilted the phone for everyone to see. "Utilities here." Even the medical bill from last fall that no one wanted to admit existed. The silence was now a weight crushing them. Faces leaned forward, eyes narrowing on the screen. I slid the phone across the table toward Imogen, the lawyer cousin. She took it with steady hands, scrolling slowly, her expression tightening with each line. Sophrona's face stiffened, her voice sharpened. "She's twisting this. She wanted to pay." "No," I said, cutting her off again. "I had no choice, because while you played hostess and polished your boutique image, bills were piling up. Someone had to face reality." A murmur rose from the end of the table. One uncle turned on Sophrona. "Is this true? You let her pay everything while you—" His voice trailed off, disgust heavy in his tone. "I didn't let her do anything," Sophrona snapped, her composure cracking. "She's exaggerating." Imogen's voice cut in, quiet but firm. "These are legitimate transfers. Every cent is hers. She's telling the truth." The weight shifted in an instant. I could feel it, the balance of power moving away from Sophrona, away from my husband, and toward me. For the first time, their silence wasn't against me. It was against her. I leaned back in my chair, no longer trembling. In America, proof isn't in words, it's in receipts. The room had turned, and Sophrona knew it. Her cheeks flushed red as whispers rose around her. My husband pressed his palm to his forehead, avoiding every eye. I gathered my phone back into my hand, the glow fading as I locked the screen. The silence that followed was different now. Heavy, yes, but not suffocating me anymore. It wrapped around Sophrona instead, pressing down on the pedestal she had built for herself. Honora tried once more, her voice weak. "This doesn't change anything. We are still family," I interrupted, calm as steel. "Family isn't about sharing a name. It's about sharing responsibility. I carried it alone while you erased me. That ends tonight." The room stilled again, but this time I felt no humiliation, only clarity. They thought I was powerless, but I held the receipts, and with them, the truth they could never erase. The room still vibrated with the echoes of my last revelation. The air was dense, every whisper bouncing off the polished walls of the dining room. Some relatives leaned toward one another, muttering quietly. Others avoided my eyes altogether. Sophrona sat stiff, her hand gripping the stem of her glass, her knuckles pale. My husband stared at the table, silent, as though the wood grain might swallow him whole. For the first time, I didn't feel myself shrinking in their silence. I wasn't the one suffocating anymore. They were. The weight of truth had shifted. They were caught in it, tangled by the threads I had chosen to pull. I folded my hands in my lap and let the quiet stretch, breathing steadily. Silence once suffocated me. Now it suffocated them. Then, slowly, deliberately, I reached into my bag. I pulled out a thick folder and laid it flat on the table. The shuffle of papers broke the uneasy lull, heads turning as I set a pair of keys on top. The metallic clink echoed like a bell tolling change. "This house," I said evenly, my gaze steady on Sophrona. "The one you invited everyone to, the one where you've staged your charades and orchestrated my humiliation, it belongs to me." Gasps rippled through the room. My aunt covered her mouth. A cousin leaned forward, whispering, "What?" Sophrona's face twisted, shock flashing before she barked a laugh. "That's ridiculous! Everyone knows this is our family home. Stop making things up, Ayala." I slid the folder open, revealing signed contracts, notarized documents with clear stamps of legality. Not made up. Purchased. Paid in full. Deeded in my name. Her smirk faltered, words stumbling. "No, this isn't—" "They had me cooking in a kitchen I owned, serving food in a house that was mine," I said, my voice carrying over the table. "And you all let her treat me like a guest." Relatives leaned in closer, the documents spreading under the dim light of the chandelier. Their gasps filled the void, the balance of power flipping visibly. "Let me see those," Imogen, the lawyer cousin, said firmly. She adjusted her glasses and pulled the contracts toward her. The room quieted, the only sound the turning of pages as she studied each sheet. Sophrona tried to regain her footing. "She's manipulating you. She must have forged—" Imogen raised a hand, silencing her. "These are authentic. The notary stamp is valid. And here, your husband's signature, acknowledging the transfer. Ayala's name is the sole owner." The impact landed like a gavel. A murmur of disbelief rose, followed by angry whispers. Honora pressed her palm to her chest, her lips parting, but no words coming out. "Why didn't you tell us?" an uncle demanded, turning to my husband. His face flushed crimson, jaw tightening as he sputtered, I didn't think it mattered." "Didn't matter," another cousin snapped. "You let her carry everything, humiliated while living in her house?" Sophrona's facade cracked further. "You're all being fooled. She planned this. She's trying to tear us apart." "No," I said calmly, pushing the folder back into place. "I didn't plan your cruelty. I simply stopped covering it." Aunt Cheryl shook her head, muttering to the cousin beside her, "All this time." The room no longer orbited Sophrona. Conversations turned sharp, eyes pinned to her instead of me. She shifted uncomfortably, her authority bleeding out of her like sand through open hands. "In America, words can be twisted. Contracts cannot," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. Some relatives nodded in agreement. Others shook their heads in disgust. Not at me, but at Sophrona. The tide had shifted, irreversible now. Sophrona slammed her palm on the table. "You're nothing but manipulative. You think this makes you better than us?" "It makes me free," I replied. "And it makes you exposed." Her chair scraped violently as she shoved herself up and stormed from the room, heels pounding down the hallway. The sound echoed like a retreating drumbeat of defeat. Honora cleared her throat, trying weakly to salvage dignity. "This doesn't define our family." But no one supported her. Conversations had turned against her too, relatives standing to gather their belongings, murmuring about deceit and shame. I leaned back in my chair, breathing evenly, calm spreading through me like water over fire. For years, I had begged for a seat at the table. Now I owned the table they sat at. They thought I was their shadow, but I was the foundation beneath their feet, and now I had pulled it away. The moment the documents hit the table in Chapter 9, the room shifted, but the aftermath came like a wave that no one could control. Relatives whispered, some leaning across plates to question each other, others sitting back in stunned silence. My heart was steady now, not pounding as before. I had said my piece. What came next wasn't mine to carry. Sophrona's face twisted, her voice rising higher than the clinking of cutlery. "You've been plotting this all along, haven't you? Manipulating, twisting, setting me up to look like a fool." I leaned back, watching her unravel. Truth doesn't need to plot. It stands by itself. Honora tried to seize control. She raised her hand like a judge silencing a courtroom. "This is our family. Our business. These conversations don't belong in front of everyone. We keep it in-house." Her plea faltered as an uncle snapped, "In-house? You've let her run this place like a stage show while Ayala carried the weight. You should be ashamed." The tension erupted, voices clashing across the table. Cousins argued in low, heated tones. One aunt muttered, "I always knew something was wrong," while another hissed, "You're exaggerating. Ayala loves drama." I sat still, calm amid the storm, listening as fear turned into blame-shifting. And I thought, the louder they yell, the closer you are to the truth. At last, I stood, the chair legs scraping softly against the floor. My voice cut through the noise. For years, I asked for nothing but respect. Tonight, I leave with something far more valuable: my dignity. The chaos stilled. My words hung like iron. Sophrona's mouth opened, but no sound came. Even Honora closed hers. I looked at them each in turn. Family is not blood. It is not contracts or names. It is loyalty. It is respect. And I was given neither. I won't remain in a house where cruelty passes as tradition. A hush swept the room. Relatives exchanged glances, some ashamed, others shaken. My voice didn't tremble. There was no plea, no desperation, only finality. I reached for the untouched champagne flute before me, still full from earlier humiliation. I stood straighter and placed it in the center of the table, the glass ringing softly as it touched the wood. The sound pierced deeper than shouting ever could. Their eyes followed it. That single glass spoke louder than words. The toast that had excluded me now became the monument of my refusal. Sophrona gave a brittle laugh, forcing bravado. Symbolism, really? You think one glass changes everything? Her tone cracked, betraying the fear behind it. She knew. It wasn't just a glass, I said quietly, but firmly. It's a mirror. And in it, you all can see yourselves. The cruelty, the silence, the shame. The weight of the moment pressed into every corner. One cousin looked down at her plate, another adjusted his tie uncomfortably. Some faces showed embarrassment, others grim thought. Sophrona for once had nothing to say. I gathered my purse from the back of my chair. The leather strap slid smoothly across my arm. I didn't rush, didn't stumble. Calm was my ally now. The room stayed eerily still. No one called my name, no one tried to stop me. Their silence, which once caged me, had turned into my freedom. I paused in the doorway, breathing in the thick air one last time. For years, I begged for inclusion. Tonight, their silence was my release. I stepped out, heels clicking against the hallway tile, each step a line drawn further away from their web. I left behind more than a glass that night. I left them to drink the taste of their own silence. When I stepped out of the dining room, leaving behind the glass of champagne that had once mocked me, the house began to empty in its own way. Relatives shuffled about, gathering coats from the hooks by the door, slipping shoes back on, lowering their voices into hushed clusters. The long table was still cluttered with dishes and scraps of conversation, but at its center, the untouched flute sat gleaming, a silent witness to what had unfolded. People cast furtive glances, some at Sophrona, who hovered by the window with a face set like stone, others at Honora, whose hands shook as she tried to gather plates, but their eyes always flickered back to me, standing by the porch, my purse strap across my shoulder, calm as I had ever been. When the noise dies down, the truth echoes louder. As the last of the voices dimmed, I felt a presence behind me. "Ayala," a soft voice said. I turned to see Bryna, my husband's aunt, her expression tender but firm. She stepped closer, speaking low so only I could hear. "You don't need to apologize," she said. Her eyes held mine, unwavering. "They are the ones who should." For a moment, my throat tightened. I hadn't realized how desperately I needed even one person to say it out loud. A warmth spread through me, washing away the residue of their cruelty. It wasn't an apology from the family, but it was enough to remind me I wasn't crazy. "Thank you," I whispered. She touched my arm lightly. "I've watched for years. I should have spoken sooner, but know this, some of us see you. Some of us always have." Her words were a balm over wounds that had long festered. I thought of something Brené Brown once wrote. What we don't need in the midst of struggle is shame for being human. Tonight, I refused their shame. Inside, Sophrona tried to resume her performance. "Everyone, don't blow this out of proportion," she said loudly, forcing a laugh. Families fight, but we're still united. But the room no longer revolved around her. Several cousins slipped away quietly, their expressions guarded. One paused by me at the door, giving me a slight nod. Nothing more, but enough to say, "I know, and I'm with you." Car doors shut outside, engines rumbled to life. Through the window, I watched taillights disappear one by one. Sophrona's voice grew sharper as the crowd thinned. "You're all being ridiculous," she snapped, trying to gather those who remained. But every slammed door, every quiet goodbye, was another fracture in her control. I thought, sometimes revolutions don't start with shouts. They start with footsteps walking away. The house, once buzzing with chatter, grew eerily hollow. Doors closed, shoes scuffed against the porch, cars rolled off into the night, leaving Sophrona and Honora behind. Honora muttered angrily about family loyalty, but no one answered her. I stood by the porch rail, watching the street settle into calm. The cicadas sang, the night breeze cooled my skin. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to shrink or defend. I felt taller. True family isn't made of those who share blood, but those who stand beside you when others tear you down. Tonight proved who belonged to which side. I breathed deeply, shoulders lighter than they had been in years. For so long I had begged for inclusion. I had twisted myself small, hoping they might see me as worthy. But as I watched the last car pull away, I realized something far more powerful. I didn't need their validation. For the first time in years, I felt free. Not because they finally accepted me, but because I stopped begging for it. That night, I didn't just walk away from their house, I walked into my own freedom. Days later, we gathered again, though the mood this time was taut, like a rope stretched too tight. The same house, the same walls, but the air was different. The whispers had grown legs and traveled across town. Everyone had heard about the documents, the champagne glass, the silence that swallowed them whole. They called this meeting to clear the air, but I knew what it really was, damage control. Sophrona entered first, wearing a tailored suit as if this were a press conference. She smiled too brightly, her voice pitched to sound conciliatory. "We've had misunderstandings," she announced to the group, "but we are family, and family deserves healing." She cast her eyes at me, a subtle challenge. Relatives were split down the middle. Some leaned back, arms crossed, suspicion etched into their faces after last week's revelations. Others shifted nervously, unsure of where to stand. I sat quietly, spine straight, my purse at my side. They thought I would cower or retreat. They forgot I had already left their prison. I rose slowly, letting the murmur of voices die down. I unlocked my phone and projected the screen onto the television mounted on the wall. A video file glowed. "What is this now?" Sophrona asked, the confidence in her tone faltering. I pressed play. Her own voice filled the room. Recorded weeks ago, she sat with a friend over wine, laughing. "Of course I don't give Ayala dessert. She needs to remember her place. Honestly, it's fun. She tries so hard and I just cut her out." She chuckled in the video, sipping from her glass. The best part? She doesn't even fight back. It makes it too easy. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, sharp intakes of breath. Sophrona lunged toward me. That's taken out of context. You're twisting. Proof isn't in the stories we tell, I said, cutting her off. It's in the words we wish no one heard. She turned to the room, desperate. You all know me. You know I was joking. But the silence she once weaponized now turned against her. No one laughed. No one saved her. Then came another voice, unexpected. Imogen, the lawyer cousin, stood slowly. She cleared her throat. I need to say something. Months ago, I overheard Sophrona telling Honora she enjoyed seeing Ayala put in her place. I stayed quiet because I didn't want conflict. But it wasn't a joke. It was cruel. And it was real. Another cousin spoke up, eyes lowered. I saw it too. At Christmas, she made sure only Ryan got the gift card. She told me not to mention it to Ayala. I should have said something. The dominoes fell, one by one. The witnesses who had stayed silent now stepped forward. Sophrona's defenses crumbled with every voice that confirmed what I had lived. Her face went pale, her words tripping over each other, but no one believed her anymore. For years, they asked me to doubt myself. Tonight, their own voices carried my truth. I let the storm build until the air itself vibrated with vindication. Then I stood again, calm, resolute. I don't need this family, I said. What I needed was justice, and tonight, I gave it to myself. I reached into my bag one last time and pulled out the keys. Slowly, deliberately, I placed them on the table, the metal clinking against wood. This house is yours to fight over now. I no longer care to anchor myself here. As I turned toward the door, something unexpected happened. A soft sound swelled. Applause. Quiet, hesitant at first, then stronger, spreading down the table. They weren't clapping for drama. They were clapping for release, for truth that had finally been spoken. I walked out, not in silence this time, but with their hands echoing behind me. On the porch, the evening air felt different, lighter. The weight I had carried for years slipped off my shoulders. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was freedom. And in their downfall, I found mine. Sometimes the sweetest dessert isn't served at the table, it's served in the silence after you've walked away for good.